course, you're a political practitioner, and you certainly know about the divisions here in Washington, even within the conference. And I wonder if you can explore that for a moment. Is this a real story, or are the media overplaying divisions within the Republican conference, specifically in the House, after what we saw happen to Kevin McCarthy this year?
So I think that the divisions nationally, to me, that actually shows more reflective of where the American people are. We're somewhere in the middle. The fringes may be the loudest voices, but by and large, the majority of the country is somewhere in the middle when it comes to political ideology. So to me, that actually makes sense of how close it is. That's a positive in some ways. But I think within the conference, yes, it's being exploited, and it will feed into the narrative of Republicans can't govern and they are just chaotic. If they don't get in line behind Johnson in a less than dramatic way, it would be helpful for them. Again, to kick off President Trump's presidency, really only has this first year to make a big mark, because then members of the House at least will be in campaign mode, and he'll be coming up on a midterms that'll really reflect about whether or not he's done a good job in that first year. So I do think the divisions in the Republican conference are most problematic, but there are plenty of issues in the Democratic caucus. You see that when AOC, Congresswoman, didn't get the chairman position, a lot of controversy around that, but it was not maybe as shared as much on news networks and different sources. But the Republicans have a lens on that because they are taking over the government.
Well, let's get into that, Jeannie, for a moment. In your party, it's a lot easier to be the opposition party, the party in the minority, than it is the governing party. The divisions inside the Democratic Party are real, though, with some pretty intense soul searching coming off the losses we saw in this cycle. Will it impact legislating on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, to your point, I mean, Democrats being in the minority, they don't have the responsibility. They don't have the power to legislate by themselves. And so it won't impact. But to Maura's point, there are serious divisions in the Democratic Party as well. And I told you before, and I will reiterate it, I think it was a mistake for Democrats not to go with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for that position for a variety of reasons, but particularly since Democrats have a really, really big challenge on their hands, as we saw in the election, when it comes to using new technology to communicate. And she does that almost better than anybody. And she has practiced that. And so I am not a big supporter of where she lands on a policy perspective, but from a communication perspective, as it pertains to critiques of the White House or the upcoming White House, I think she would have been a benefit to Democrats there. That said, they decided to go with the old guard. I think that's a mistake. And I think we will continue to see this. Part of the problem here is the way we run our elections. And unless we address these heavily gerrymandered districts on both sides, we will continue to see on both the Democratic and Republican side divided between these extremes and the more moderates that Maura was talking about.
And Jeannie Sheehan Zaino brushes up against the truth once again. Denver Riggleman, the former Republican congressman from Virginia, talked about alliances for Donald Trump in the House, Maura, and a question of whether the Freedom Caucus is in fact loyal to the MAGA president. Here's what he said.
You know, a lot of people call the Freedom Caucus the Trump Protection Caucus. But in reality, there are people there that are very idealistic, right? They're ideologues, and they're also going to do their own thing, and their districts are relatively safe. So as we get closer to the midterms, if things aren't tracking the way they want based on their ideology, based on what they're looking at as far as the deficit and the debt, you could see some issues.
He's making your point, Maura. I just wonder if we have a year before Republicans and Democrats start running for the midterms.
We may not. I think, to what this conversation is about when it comes to Freedom Caucus members, it goes back to this idea of it's so much easier to complain than it is to lead. It's so much easier to point the finger at somebody else than to actually take stock and take responsibility and be a leader and take a role in finding a solution. Finding a solution doesn't mean that you get to have your way, because if we went with whatever Thomas Massie wanted, it's just not feasible. He wants to cut and slash and not spend anything. Well, that's just not possible. And again, bringing it back to being realist, you have to work across the aisle. You have to work and come to a common ground to find a solution. And that's what we should want our members of Congress, our leaderships to do. I think that we have certainly, you're going to see some members feeling the heat based on their actions in this first year, and they may have to start campaigning sooner than they would have planned to.
Jeannie, we haven't mentioned the President of the United States yet, and that's been happening in our panel discussions recently as Joe Biden winds things down. He's on his way back from St. Croix. How about that for a change, by the way? St. Croix to Delaware. That's the Biden's day today. But the next couple of weeks are going to be interesting to watch him as we consider the idea of preemptive pardons and him sitting behind Donald Trump as he takes the oath of office.
That's right. And, we've been spending a lot of time the last few days remembering Jimmy Carter, who, left office at 56 and had decades by which to reestablish his reputation leaving office. Joe Biden does not have that time, arguably. And so he is going to be using the next few days, 20 days, to try to do what he can. And most of that action is behind the scenes, trying to move the Senate to pass to confirm his nominees to the judiciary, because that remains the one way in which a departing president can obstruct his successor's plans going forward. And that is what we're going to see. So the minute Donald Trump gets in office and tries to pass an EO or a directive to, say, address birthright citizenship, you're going to see a challenge in the courts, and it's going to be a court in the federal level that is made up of a lot of Joe Biden nominees. And of course, I should say that his trip back to Delaware, it sounds like what we should be doing, Joe and Maura, on the islands right now.
Yeah, we can take their place very easily, I feel like, on St. Croix. We could be there in time for our program on Thursday. I just don't see it happening. Maura, a lot has been said about Donald Trump's first day. We only have 30 seconds left. Is it the border EO that happens first?
I would think yes. I think that would be his best plan. Certainly not doing January 6 pardons. I think it would be the border and taking back some of control there and showing his voters that he is going to do what he said he was going to do.